There could not have been a better time to hear from Mr. Ashish Dhawan, who I will be inviting to the stage for the keynote address. Ashish is the founder and CEO of the Convergence Foundation. He is also the founding chairperson of Ashoka University and Central Square Foundation and serves on the governing board of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Before his second career as a philanthropist, Ashish founded and ran Chris Capital, the country's leading private equity firm. He graduated from Yale University and received his MBA from Harvard Business School. Welcome, Mr. Dhawan.
Congratulations to Pratham. 30 years is an incredible journey. So, congratulations, yeah. You know, that 30-year mark, 30 years ago, is when India really took off on a different trajectory. The 1991 moment had just happened. And we all know that post-91, India has grown fairly consistently at about 6% real GDP growth over that period of time. We've had our ebbs and flows. We haven't really punched below 5%, and we've rarely punched above 8%. But we've consistently grown at 6.5%. We've been on a pretty good trajectory. A lot of it has happened because of macro reforms, which is really what 1991 did. And I want to start a little bit about talking about what it'll take for us to grow at 8 to 10% over the next 30 years. And I'd say that beyond the macro reforms and opening our economy, what we really need to do is liberalize the entrepreneur in India, free up the entrepreneur in India from the burdens that the state puts on the entrepreneur. But before that, I just want to take you back to, the work done by Angus Madison, who I think many of you have read the fact that India, China was 60% of world GDP for the longest time, and then for 250 years, there was continuous decline in our share of global GDP. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that we missed out on the Industrial Revolution. We were colonized, and of course, many things happened during that phase. But really, starting about the 1980s, we've moved from a world of divergence. Divergence in that per capita income that was much more similar across countries everywhere in the world really had diverged for 250 years, started to converge back slowly. And I would argue that the 21st century really is about the rise of the rest. The West rose for 250 years. The West, if you include the OECD, all the OECD countries, about 1 billion people. It's this moment, the 21st century, is really about the rise of the other 7 billion. And many countries have already been, on that trajectory. China, of course, has grown much faster than India, has much higher per capita income than India. But my hope is that we can get there in India as well. And I wanted to lay out 6 or 7 key things that I think need to happen for us to actually get there. The first really is for us to have a pro-growth mindset. I still find it quite astonishing that even after 30 plus years of liberalization, macro reforms, more than half our states in India are not pro-growth. I mean, Davos is not an indicator, but the 6 states you saw in Davos, the Telanganas, the Andhras, the Tamil Nadu, this time around the UP, Maharashtra, these are states that are typically chasing investors. They want businesses to come locate in their state. They want to roll out the red carpet as opposed to just red tape. That's what China did for 40 years. It rolled out the red carpet. And I think having that pro-growth mindset is really important. I mean, Bengal, which is the state I grew up in, unfortunately went into decline. And no business wants to locate in Bengal. They've all abandoned Bengal. And Bengal has only gone down in terms of its per capita ranking in India. Punjab, which didn't go through structural transformation, really had agriculture, but really couldn't succeed in industry, also declined, went from a number one GDP per capita state to a middling state now, and possibly now going to the bottom half if it doesn't do something. So I think having a pro-growth mindset, and half our states in India are economically dark, how they can sort of start to develop this. My hope is that UP, which has turned the corner, may inspire some of these economically dark states to start to become brighter as we go forward. A second one is really this issue of ease of doing business. It is not about some World Bank ranking or checking some boxes. I think what we really need to look at is the voice of the customer, the investor, the entrepreneur. And in a very real sense, doing business is really hard in India. Large companies manage, but for the mid-sized or the small entrepreneur, it is very difficult to do business in India. And I think finally the government has realized that we really need to work on real ease of doing business. Now what Andhra is calling speed of doing business in a very, very real and tangible way. And whether it's things that we didn't do in 91, which is our labor laws, our land use, pollution norms, all kinds of things, Inspector Raj at the local level. We need to free up the entrepreneur, because India has fantastic entrepreneurs. Today they have access to capital. Talent is available, but it's all these various friction costs that really put sand in the wheels of progress for these entrepreneurs. So that for me is the second one. And there are some changes starting to happen, but it's been slow. We need to do this in mission mode. A third one is around our urban areas, which are really our centers of growth. I mean, if you look at India is urbanizing slowly, but really GDP is massively concentrated in urban regions. We have hardly had a spatial plan for our urban centers, but we've never had an economic plan, and which is fine. Cities do grow organically. But if you look at many of our cities in the region, in Asia, they've really grown through a concerted economic plan. And finally, I think it's dawned upon us, the greater Mumbai region has a GDP of about $140 billion. It finally has a plan to go to 300 billion with 15 concrete projects, and a chief minister now who wants to transform that city. Mumbai is an engine of India's development and growth. NCR, where we are, is a massive, it's 9% of India's GDP, and will continue to grow as more people come in to the NCR. And India has about 20 large urban hubs. We need to invest. We are now starting to put more capex into rail and road, but urban has been ignored. And we really need to put much more money behind these major centers of growth. A fourth one is exports. No country has grown rapidly without catering to the world market, which is much larger than the home market. India may be touching 3.5–4 trillion, but the world market is 25 times our size. And it obviously makes you more competitive. Our share in goods trade, manufactured goods, has been stuck at 1.8% for a long period of time. And we really have not prioritized exports. And 5–6 things need to happen in terms of reforms in each of these areas to make India competitive, because we have massive disabilities, and we've done incremental reforms. So I know that the minister has talked about $1 trillion target for services, for manufacturing, but really making this happen. And in electronics, we're starting to see the train leave the station, and India is doing much better. But in many other areas, it's been stuck. And especially labor-intensive exports, because India's largest endowment is cheap labor and available labor, is one area where we need to succeed. We have a 3% global market share in labor-intensive exports. China's at 30%. That gap needs to narrow, and China will shed it. Labor costs are going up, geopolitics, etc. We'll see what happens in a Trump world, but I think India will have opportunities. A fifth one really relates to innovation and R&D. We've seen the whole world is talking about DeepSeek and what China is doing to compete and is at the frontier now alongside the US. India obviously has talent. We really have not invested much in innovation and R&D. even our tech entrepreneurs have been very focused on basic copycat models. And I think India needs to move towards deeper tech in the startup ecosystem. It's starting to happen in a small way. And even our big corporates need to make it happen. I'll give you one statistic. All of India's corporate GDP is $10 billion. All of India's corporate GDP is $10 billion. I mean, that's less than Huawei or Samsung or Apple or any one of these companies. It needs to be 100 billion by 2035. And figuring out what are the incentives, how we can stimulate it, and government needs to think through that. There are some initiatives like the new National Research Foundation, the 1 lakh crore fund announced by the Prime Minister, but much more needs to be done. China, in a 20-year window, its corporate R&D went up 100x. Between 2000 and 2020, China's corporate R&D went up dramatically. Obviously, GDP went up, but corporate R&D as a share of GDP went up dramatically as well. And both those factors resulted in 100x. So I'm seeing a 10x in the next decade. A sixth one is really employability. We've so far had lots of skills programs, short-term programs. They haven't worked. I mean, the thing that really works is on-the-job training. I think finally it's been recognized by the government. Apprenticeships, the PM's internship program, a number of other initiatives. Otherwise, people were getting skilled, but not really getting placed into jobs. And I think apprenticeships, internships is the way to go. We have a massive jobs crisis, as you know, and we've not really had structural transformation. We've grown, but we've not created jobs. We still have 45% of the labor force in agriculture. Vietnam, which is a comparable country, which is pulling ahead on the back of exports, manufacturing, today only 25% of the labor force is in agriculture. So Vietnam has seen structural transformation. It's visible when you go to Vietnam today. You can see the progress. It's not just a top layer. It's much more broad-based. And India really needs to push for much greater structural transformation. And from an employability standpoint, much more practical, learn by doing, learn while earning kind of model. A final one, of course, which is why we're all here, really is education, which is the foundational layer. It's as Manish Sabharwal, who was your speaker last year, has always said, education is the prepare business and skilling is the repair business. So I've always been very passionate about education, and I was really stunned. I mean, ASER is something I've followed always, and we all grow up in our little bubble, and when you look at the ASER data, it sort of shocks you. And you also realize how important the early years are and how children, once they fall behind, their learning trajectory really starts to plateau. And of course, some of them catch up by 5th grade or 8th grade, they're able to read, but they're not able to they fall behind in terms of relative to grade level, they continue to fall behind. And that really has been a huge challenge. It's been sort of almost flat, some incremental improvement in the ASER data, and of course a dip with COVID. So it's really heartening to see that finally we're seeing a significant improvement. It's still, the numbers are still very, very low, but a real improvement in numeracy and a reasonable improvement in reading levels as well. I'll obviously go through the report in some detail and try to analyze it further. I wanted to highlight 5 things that I think from an education standpoint, now that the government has put in place Nipun Bharat and has recognized the importance of FLN, what do we really need to do going forward? The first really is a Nipun Bharat 2.0. I think Nipun Bharat 1.0 raised the salience around FLN, right, which ASER and Pratham had been talking about for years, but I think finally the government put its weight behind it and said, we're going to have over 5 years a 13,000 crore budget for non-teacher salary, teaching, learning material, capacity building, district PMUs, assessment, etc. And, states really got behind it. Many states have a UP Nipun mission, and, all these states have really gotten behind it. Some states less so. But it's become a movement across the country. Some of the basics have been put in place. I think you look at many of the states, they have some form of structured pedagogy in place. The teaching learning material data you just saw has really improved. So earlier you wouldn't get teaching learning material into the classroom, much better teaching learning material as well. Teacher guides, lesson plans, etc. We're much better equipped. I think the process indicators are even more positive than the learning outcome indicators. And that means that we need to really stay with this. So Nipun Bharat 2.0 is really about taking what we have and building upon it. What we've seen is that there's been some improvement, but a long ways to go. So I don't think this can be a 5-year mission. There needs to be another 5 years to it. 2.0 means there's another 5 years beyond the first phase, because it's only in 10 years that we can start to show true results and really move the needle. And my sense is that apart from whatever we're doing in Nipun Bharat 1.0, a couple of other things could be done. One is, which the NEP talks about, is Balvatika. We're already seeing the children, which is very heartening, that at age 5 are not going into first grade. They're going into first grade at age 6 primarily. But we need to make room for those 5-year-old children in school. In private schools, they do go to upper KG, not in government schools. And I think that needs to change. And it's starting to happen. Some states are doing it. But as more budgets become available, Balvatika is something we need to push for in a very significant way. With Nipun, I think a more concerted effort to really focus now on district level, not just state level, but district level implementation and involving community as well as we go forward. So having this 10-year runway, I think, will be really, really important. A second one, which the report touches on, is early childhood education. So while with ECE, it's heartening to see that, of course, the enrollment is there. Children are going to Anganwadis now, and it's great to see that almost 80% of 3-year-olds now are in some form of preschool, and a much larger, almost 85–90% of 4-year-olds are in some form of preschool. So we're coming close to universalization. But I still think we're dramatically underinvesting in ECE. ECE only gets about 3+% of the education budget. Across lower middle income countries, ECE is at about 6.5% of the education budget. And in more developed countries, it's 8 to 10% of the education budget. So over a period of time, we almost need to double our share of the education budget going towards ECE. It has a very, very small budget. The Anganwadi workers, we've got almost 14 lakh Anganwadi workers. I know there are some studies that have shown that putting an additional worker in there, gives you real improvement in school readiness. And I think that's a high ROI investment for India. It'll employ another 14 lakh women. It'll really improve outcomes, within the Anganwadi system. And a combination of age 3 and 4 being for Anganwadis and eventually age 5, Balvatika in school, is the model for India going forward. So a much greater focus on ECE, almost putting it into mission mode, the way FLN has been put into mission mode. Why only grades 1, 2, and 3? Why not start earlier and make it more of a continuum? And then we have a real shot at making sure that children by age 8 or by 3rd grade really are reading with meaning and have the numeracy skills that we want. A third one is, education technology, EdTech. I was always quite skeptical, quite honestly, with EdTech because, I've seen before my eyes there's a lot of promotion of EdTech. EduComp was a very hot company at one point with its product, and Byju's was a very hot company, So the challenge with EdTech has been that a lot of people were scaling things without evidence of whether it actually works, very gimmicky, and a lot of things actually didn't work. But finally, I think we're starting to see better outcomes. At smaller scale, at least the evidence is there now that there are some solutions, most of which are pedagogically sound EdTech products, as opposed to gimmicky EdTech products. And so my hope is that as we go forward, EdTech can play an important role. AI, I think, can also play some role, not just in terms of student-facing products, but also developing use cases so that teachers get more feedback, so we make life easier for teachers. And I know people are doing some experiments right now, and we'll see, and hopefully those things will get integrated into the classroom as we go forward, because it's been very hard to integrate EdTech into the classroom. But I think the good news is with the data that you've shown with regards to smartphone penetration, which we all know about, and with the number of children who have access to smartphones and the time that they're spending on the smartphone for educational purposes, there really still should be some hope if these are good products that are going to help them as they go forward, and if it's more tightly integrated into what they're doing in school as well. A fourth one really is about building larger school complexes. We cannot, going forward, have a school system in India with 1.5 million schools, 15 lakh schools. I know we've got the largest school system in the world with 250 million children, and it's politically difficult to shut down small schools. But we're now at a stage with the hollowing out over a period of time where there are 4 lakh government schools with less than 50 children. I mean, that just it's hard to get any form of, forget about accountability, but for a teacher to work with multiple grades and function and deliver outcomes that we want. And as we become a middle-income country, we're a low middle-income country today, we really need proper schools. I mean, most schools, most countries have transitioned from these small boxes to larger boxes as you go forward. I mean, China has half the number of schools today that it had 20, 25 years ago. And China today has a quarter of the number of schools India has. I mean, yes, the school-going population is smaller, but its physical footprint is 3 times ours. It's going to cost money to build these larger boxes. It'll be a transition. I'm not advocating for shutting down these small schools, but for a transition. And there are some initiatives like the Prem Shri schools, CM Rise in Madhya Pradesh, but they are very small. I think this will require real, not just capital expenditure, but some imagination in terms of what these integrated government schools look like. I think right now it's been very incremental, but over the next 10 years at least, my hope is that we end up with many more children going to these larger integrated school complexes versus these very small units where teachers really have to struggle and don't have the support. A fifth one is really examination reform. Our board exams haven't changed too much, although CBSE started to change a few years ago by including competency-based questions. And it's progressing every year. I think there is positive change. Our state board haven't done much. And we know a lot trickles down from the board exam. It doesn't just have an effect on grades 9 and 10, but actually has an effect, cascading effect, all the way down to middle school. And so rethinking, I think this is a good point in time to really think of board exam reform. CBSE has started to do things, but all our state boards really need to look at this seriously. NEP also talks about learning markers at the end of grade 3, grade 5, and grade 8. Quite candidly, while states are doing something, I don't think we're taking it as seriously as we should in India. There's a much bigger opportunity to do something there. And in terms of sample surveys, of course, ASER has been there as a third-party survey, the best out there, the only one out there. But government has a couple of its own which really need to be strengthened. The NAS, the National Achievement Survey, needs to be strengthened. The government did a good thing by introducing Foundational Learning Survey in 2022, because the challenge with NAS, it's a paper and pencil test. So you really can't test younger children who need an oral assessment. And the FLS is able to do that. So I think the government really needs to ensure that the FLS happens this year. ASER, of course, has come out, but happens this year and happens on a regular basis because it's quite distinct from NAS. So thinking about our whole assessment and examination system and reforming it is the fifth one. So I'll just close by saying that I'm quite hopeful Firstly, thank you, Pratham. Thank you, ASER, for everything you do. I think it's a phenomenal contribution, not just to the country, but to all emerging countries that have really copied what ASER has done and taken it to scale. But I'm quite hopeful that we're on a journey now where at least, we're starting to see progress. There's some green shoots. And hopefully this will give the government some confidence, because government often lacks confidence itself, that the school system can improve, because it's been hard. It's easier to build roads and, water to the home and sanitation, all of which have been great accomplishments of the Indian state. But education is much more complex. I mean, nothing will change till something doesn't change in the classroom itself. Just building fancier buildings is not going to do it. So it's a hard, long journey. And that's why I was advocating for a 2.0, integrating in ECE and doing some of these other things, because it'll take us 10 years if we really want to turn the needle. I mean, our learning poverty, the World Bank measures learning poverty, which looks at NAS data, not ASER data, really shows that 55% of children at the end of grade 5, age 10, can't read with meaning. And I think that 55% really needs to come down to 25% in the next decade, in 2035, and that should be our collective effort. Countries like China, Vietnam, Sri Lanka are already ahead. They're doing better than that even today. So that's a bare minimum for what we need to achieve going forward. I do believe that if we want to achieve Viksit Bharat or becoming a developed country, I think this foundational layer is very important. It's very important we do it now, because these are the children who will grow up and become productive citizens in our economy, 15 years from now. And so this next 10 years, and also look at our demographic bulge. We lose our demographic edge. It goes away after 25 years. Our population peaks in 2050. So I really believe these next 10 years are super critical for the work that we've done in the early years in education. We've made some progress, but lots more needs to be done as we go forward. And I think many organizations can work together to support the government with its effort in driving this as we go forward. And thank you again, Pratham and ASER, for everything that you have done, inspiring all of us.